I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
At first, the claim sounded too dramatic to accept at face value. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, reportedly confirming that Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, had been stripped of all royal titles. But inside that headline set a deeper question, one Buckingham Palace has not publicly answered in those terms. Was this merely another online storm, or a sign of a much harder royal boundary forming around the future of the monarchy? For years, the story of Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, and Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, has never been only about distance from palace life. It has been about identity, belonging, and the question of what a royal title truly means when the person carrying it no longer serves the crown in the traditional way. That is why this latest wave of reports has drawn so much attention. Not because every dramatic claim has been confirmed, and not because the palace has publicly announced such a sweeping decision, but because the very suggestion touches one of the most sensitive nerves inside the British royal family. Titles are not decoration in royal life. They carry history, rank, duty, expectation, and public meaning. They tell the nation who stands inside the institution, who represents it, who carries its traditions, and who remains connected to its future. When Queen Elizabeth II gave Harry and Meghan their Sussex titles on their wedding day, those names became part of the royal story. But after their departure from working royal life in 2020, the question changed. The issue was no longer simply what they were called. It became whether those titles still represented service, or whether they had become symbols of unresolved conflict. And that is where Prince William enters the story. The Prince of Wales is not simply Harry's older brother. He is the future king. Every public choice around him is now read through the lens of succession, leadership, and institutional survival. For many royal watchers, William represents the next version of the monarchy. More disciplined, more controlled, more careful about who speaks for the crown and who benefits from its public authority. So when reports or online commentary suggest that William has taken a firmer role in drawing boundaries around the Sussex question, people listen. They listen because they sense that this is no longer only a family disagreement. It may be a preview of how the monarchy will be managed when William's reign eventually begins. But was this really about Meghan alone? Or was it about something much larger? That is the hidden tension beneath the entire story. Meghan has become, fairly or unfairly, one of the most polarizing figures in modern royal commentary. To her supporters, she is a woman who entered an ancient institution and found it cold, restrictive, and unwilling to protect her. To her critics, she is someone who walked away from duty while continuing to carry the prestige of royal association. Between those two views sits the real palace dilemma. How does the monarchy protect its dignity without appearing cruel? How does it draw a line without making that line look personal? And how does William, as the future king, handle a wound that is both private and public? That is why the phrase, stripped of titles, carries such emotional force. It suggests finality. It suggests that the door has not merely been closed, but locked. Yet careful viewers will notice something important. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed a sweeping removal of Meghan's Sussex titles in the way the most dramatic headlines suggest. The official reality around royal titles is complicated, and that complication matters. Harry and Meghan stepped back as working members of the royal family, and their use of royal style and public royal branding became restricted. But the broader question of titles has remained a recurring topic of royal debate, political discussion, and public frustration. And perhaps that is why this story keeps returning. Because every time Meghan appears in public, launches a project, gives an interview, or is described by her royal title, the same argument begins again. Is the title now simply part of her legal and social identity, or does it still act as a bridge back to Windsor? Does it honor the past, or confuse the present? Does it belong to Meghan as a married royal name, or does the monarchy have the right to tighten every remaining connection when trust has been damaged? For older royal viewers especially, this question reaches beyond celebrity. It touches the meaning of duty. In the traditional understanding of the monarchy, status is connected to service. A title is not merely a personal brand, it is a public role. It comes with restraint, loyalty, silence when necessary, and an understanding that the crown must be protected even at personal cost. That older vision of royal life is exactly what makes the Sussex debate so difficult. Harry and Meghan stepped away from official duty, but the titles remained part of the public conversation. And for many supporters of Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, that has always felt unresolved. Catherine's position in this story is quieter, but no less important. The Princess of Wales has spent years building her image around steadiness, family, early childhood work, and loyalty to the institution. She rarely enters public disputes directly, and that silence has become part of her strength. In contrast, the Sussex story has often been shaped by interviews, claims, disagreements, and public emotional language. To royal observers, the contrast is sharp. One side represents continuity and restraint, the other represents rupture and explanation. Whether that contrast is fair or not, it has shaped how the public reads every new development. Then there is King Charles III, the monarch caught between fatherhood and duty. Charles has always faced the painful task of balancing family feeling with royal responsibility. In any question involving Harry and Meghan, he is not merely a king reviewing palace order. He is a father watching the distance between his sons harden into something more permanent. If William is seen as the figure pushing for firmer boundaries, Charles is often seen as the figure who understands the emotional cost of those boundaries. That difference matters because it creates the first real layer of conflict. The future king may want clarity, while the present king may still feel the weight of compassion. But compassion can become dangerous inside an institution if it leaves too much confusion behind. That is the argument many royal commentators return to again and again. The monarchy survives through symbols, and symbols must be clear. Who stands on the balcony matters. Who appears in official records matters. Who uses royal titles in public life matters. Even silence matters, because silence can be interpreted as permission. If the palace does not clarify the meaning of titles, others will define that meaning for themselves. And once that happens, the crown risks losing control of its own language. That may be the real reason this latest claim has gained so much attention. It is not simply because people want to know whether Meghan has lost a title. It is because they want to know whether William is now becoming the person who will finally settle the unfinished Sussex question. Is he acting as a protective brother to the institution? Is he drawing a line that Charles found too painful to draw? Or are online reports exaggerating a deeper, slower shift already happening inside royal thinking? Those questions are what make the story feel bigger than one headline. Because if the palace ever did take a final step on Meghan's titles, it would not simply affect Meghan. It would affect Harry's place in the family, Charles's legacy as a father and king, Catherine's future role beside William, and the public image of the monarchy itself. It would tell the world how far Windsor is willing to go to protect its boundaries. It would also raise a harder question. When a royal relationship breaks down, who decides when the public link must end? And that is where the story becomes more sensitive, because behind the debate over names and styles lies something the palace has never been able to fully escape: the pain of a family fracture playing out under the weight of history. The Sussex titles are not only words on a page. They are reminders of a wedding filled with promise, a departure filled with hurt, and a royal future that no longer looks the way many once imagined. So before anyone accepts the loudest version of the claim, the real question is not simply whether Meghan has been stripped of everything. The real question is why this possibility continues to feel so believable to so many royal watchers, and what that says about the trust that has been lost between the Sussexes and the House of Windsor. Because if William is now being viewed as the man who will draw the final boundary, then this story is no longer just about Meghan's title. It is about the future shape of royal authority itself. Because if William is now being viewed as the man who will draw the final boundary, then the next question becomes far more delicate. What kind of boundary can the monarchy actually enforce, and how much of the story belongs to law, symbolism, and public perception rather than one dramatic palace announcement? That distinction matters more than it first appears. In royal life, there is often a difference between what the public hears in a headline and what the institution can formally do. A title may sound like a simple label, but inside the British system, titles are layered through history, royal grant, legal tradition, parliamentary authority, and palace custom. Some styles can be restricted by royal decision. Some forms of recognition can be removed from public use. Some ceremonial privileges can quietly disappear without a grand announcement. But other titles are not changed with a single sentence. no matter how forceful the reporting may sound. And that is where this story becomes more complicated. When commentators say Meghan has been stripped of titles, they may not all mean the same thing. Some may be speaking about formal legal title. Others may be referring to the use of royal styling, palace recognition, public branding, ceremonial invitations, or the way the royal household chooses to describe someone in future arrangements. To casual viewers, those may sound like small differences. But to the monarchy, small differences are often where the real power sits. A name on an invitation, a place in a program, a style used in official language, a mention in royal communications. Each one tells the public whether a person is still being held inside the royal frame. That is why the palace does not always need to make a loud declaration for something important to shift. The royal household can change emphasis. It can narrow access. It can stop using certain forms of reference. It can allow old honors to remain in theory while making them almost invisible in practice. For an institution built on ceremony, silence, and carefully controlled language, that kind of quiet adjustment can be more powerful than a public confrontation. But if that is what royal watchers believe may be happening, then the question becomes sharper. Is the monarchy trying to punish Meghan, or is it trying to remove confusion from the public story? That question goes directly to the heart of William's future role. The Prince of Wales has spent years watching the monarchy face one problem after another: family tension, public criticism, health concerns, questions about relevance, and a younger generation less automatically loyal to the crown. In that environment, ambiguity becomes risky. If the public cannot tell who represents the monarchy, who has left it, who speaks for it, and who simply remains connected to it by history, the institution begins to lose control of its own image. For William, that would be more than a communications problem. It would be a future reign problem. A future king cannot inherit an institution where every unresolved family issue becomes a public negotiation. He cannot allow personal grievances to sit permanently beside official duty, and he cannot build a modern monarchy if the rules of belonging remain unclear. That is why some observers believe the Sussex question has become a test case for the entire royal household. It asks whether the monarchy still has the courage to define its boundaries, even when those boundaries affect people who were once at the center of the family. Harry is deeply affected by that question because he stands in two worlds at once. He is still the king's son. He is still William's brother. He is still part of the royal family by birth and history. But he is no longer a working royal, and his public life has moved far outside the old rules of palace discretion. That creates a painful tension. On one hand, family ties do not disappear because official duties change. On the other hand, the monarchy cannot operate as if private loyalty automatically gives someone public authority. That is where Meghan's position becomes even more sensitive. Her supporters may see any tightening of title use as rejection, even humiliation. They may argue that she endured extraordinary pressure, left a system that did not protect her, and should not continue to be treated as a problem simply because her name still draws attention. To them, the language of removal feels harsh, almost punitive, but critics see it differently. They argue that royal title should reflect royal service, and that public association with the crown should not remain open-ended after repeated criticism of the institution. For them, this is not about revenge. It is about consistency. If the monarchy is built on duty, then duty must mean something. If titles carry prestige, then prestige cannot be separated entirely from responsibility. Between those two views sits the problem Buckingham Palace has struggled to manage for years. Any action can look cruel. Any inaction can look weak. Any clarification can restart the argument. Any silence can allow the argument to grow on its own. And perhaps that is why William's name has become so central in this latest conversation. He represents firmness at a time when many royal supporters believe firmness has been missing. He also represents risk because firmness inside a family can easily be interpreted as coldness. The future king must protect the crown without appearing to enjoy the act of exclusion. He must defend the institution without making the monarchy seem unforgiving. That is a narrow path, and every step on it is judged. King Charles faces a different kind of burden. His reign has been shaped by transition, illness, reconciliation efforts, and the difficult emotional inheritance left by decades of family strain. Charles may understand better than anyone that public decisions can become private wounds. A father may want the door left slightly open. A monarch may know that too many open doors invite endless uncertainty. That is the quiet conflict beneath the surface, not a shouting match, but a difference in instinct between healing and order. Catherine's role, meanwhile, is not to enter the argument loudly but to embody the alternative model. The Princess of Wales has become a symbol of steadiness, especially for viewers who value tradition and restraint. Her public image suggests continuity rather than conflict. That contrast gives the palace a silent comparison it does not need to state aloud. While one branch of the family remains associated with interviews, accusations, and distance, the Wales household is increasingly presented as the center of future stability. But stability is not created by image alone. It requires decisions, and decisions require someone to absorb blame. That may be the deeper reason this story has such strong emotional pull. If the monarchy tightens its position on Meghan's titles or recognition, William may be praised by some as decisive and condemned by others as unforgiving. Harry may feel that his wife is being erased from a chapter she helped shape. Meghan may see the move as proof that the palace never intended to treat her fairly. Charles may be left carrying the sorrow of a father whose family history keeps becoming constitutional theater. Yet the institution itself may see the matter in colder terms. Not who is hurt, but what is sustainable. Not who feels betrayed, but what the crown can defend publicly. Not what would be kind in a family, but what would be clear in a monarchy. And that is the point where the story begins to move beyond Meghan. Because once title recognition becomes a question of institutional discipline, every other royal relationship is affected by the answer. The palace is not simply deciding how to describe one duchess. It is deciding how future disputes will be handled, how public loyalty will be measured, and how much personal history can remain attached to royal privilege after official duty has ended. So the deeper question is no longer whether the loudest headline is fully accurate. The deeper question is why the monarchy appears to be moving toward a future where emotional exceptions are harder to justify. And if William is becoming the figure associated with that change, then the next layer of the story is even more sensitive. Because behind the debate over Meghan's name, another issue was beginning to emerge. Who truly holds influence inside the royal household when family feeling and the survival of the crown point in opposite directions? Because behind the debate over Meghan's name, another issue was beginning to emerge. Who truly holds influence inside the royal household when family feeling and the survival of the crown point in opposite directions? That question is what gives this story its deeper weight. On the surface, the conversation appears to be about titles, names, and the public position of the Sussexes. But beneath that, it may reveal a much more important shift inside the monarchy itself. The royal family has always depended on a delicate balance between affection and authority, between private bonds and public duty. When that balance holds, the institution appears calm. When it breaks, every decision begins to look like a test of power. For much of King Charles's reign, there has been a sense that the Sussex question remained unfinished. Not unresolved because no one understood the problem, but unresolved because every possible answer came with a cost. If the king showed too much softness, critics could accuse him of allowing royal privilege to survive without royal responsibility. If he acted too firmly, others could say he was pushing his younger son even further away. That is why the matter of Meghan's title, even when discussed only through reports and commentary, carries far more meaning than a simple administrative change. It becomes a mirror of Charles's entire challenge as monarch. The king inherited more than a crown. He inherited a fractured family, a changing public mood, and a monarchy that could no longer rely on automatic respect from younger generations. Queen Elizabeth II had represented continuity for so long that her authority often calmed disputes before they reached the surface. Charles does not have that same historical shield. His decisions are judged in real time, questioned instantly, and interpreted through the emotional wounds already visible within his own family. That makes every move involving Harry and Meghan especially difficult, because the public sees both the father and the monarch in the same frame. And this is where William's influence becomes impossible to ignore. The Prince of Wales is not carrying the past in the same way. He is looking toward the future. His concern, according to many royal commentators, appears less focused on repairing old emotional damage and more focused on preventing that damage from shaping the next reign. To William, the central question may not be whether everyone can be brought back into a softer family arrangement. It may be whether the monarchy can afford to keep leaving unresolved privileges attached to unresolved conflict. That is a different instinct, and it points toward a different kind of royal leadership. Some observers believe this is why William has become such a powerful figure in the conversation. He represents the moment when patience begins to turn into policy. Not anger, not revenge, but a colder institutional judgment. If a royal role has ended, the public symbols around that role must eventually reflect the truth. That interpretation remains commentary, not confirmation. Buckingham Palace has not publicly stated that William has personally directed a final title removal. But the very fact that people believe such a thing is possible tells us something important about how his authority is now being perceived. A future king gains power long before he wears the crown. That power does not always arrive through official announcements. It arrives through confidence, through public expectation, through courtiers adjusting their instincts, and through the quiet understanding that the next reign is already taking shape. When staff, commentators, and royal watchers begin to treat William's view as decisive, it changes the emotional atmosphere around the palace. People begin asking not only what Charles wants now, but what William will tolerate later. And in the Sussex matter, that distinction may be crucial, because Harry's relationship with the crown is no longer only a personal relationship. It is also a precedent. If one royal couple can leave official duty, criticize the institution, build an independent public brand, and still retain strong royal association, then future generations will study how the palace responded. Was the response firm? Was it hesitant? Did the monarchy protect its boundaries? Or did it allow uncertainty to become normal? These are not small questions inside a family built on rank, service, and inherited duty. That is why the title debate reaches into the future. It is not just about Meghan's position today. It is about what the monarchy teaches every royal figure who comes after. Royal status cannot become something that is endlessly flexible, changing shape according to personal preference and media opportunity. At least, that is the argument many traditional royal supporters would make. For them, the institution survives because it is bigger than individual emotion. Once that principle weakens, the whole system becomes harder to defend. But there is another side to this, and it is just as important. If the palace appears too severe, it risks confirming the very criticism that Harry and Meghan have made over the years, that the institution can be cold, unforgiving, and more concerned with image than human feeling. That is the contradiction Windsor cannot easily escape. A softer approach may look weak. A harder approach may look cruel. A silent approach may look evasive. A public explanation may reopen wounds. This is why even a reported or speculative change around titles can become explosive. The facts matter, but so does the emotional meaning people attach to them. For Meghan, the title question may be interpreted by supporters as another battle over dignity. For Harry, it may feel like another sign that the family he was born into has chosen structure over reconciliation. For Charles, it may deepen the sorrow of a reign already marked by personal strain. But for William and Catherine, the issue may represent something more practical and future-facing, the need to keep the center of the monarchy clear, disciplined, and trusted. That is where Catherine's quiet importance returns. She does not need to be publicly involved in the dispute for her role to matter. The Princess of Wales has become one of the strongest symbols of the monarchy's future stability, especially after a period of uncertainty and public concern around the royal family. Her presence beside William helps shape the image of a future reign built on duty, family, restraint, and continuity. In that sense, the Sussex question is not only about who stands outside the working monarchy. It is also about who stands at its center. And the contrast is becoming sharper. One path is built around public explanation, personal grievance, and independence from palace control. The other is built around silence, service, and the slow accumulation of trust. Neither story is simple. Both carry pain. But the monarchy, by its nature, must eventually choose which model represents its future. That does not mean erasing Harry and Meghan from royal history. It means deciding whether their public royal association can continue to sit beside a future led by William and Catherine without creating constant confusion. This is why Section 3 of the story feels less like a scandal and more like a constitutional mood change. The drama may appear personal, but the consequences are institutional. The title question becomes a way of asking whether the monarchy is entering a period of stricter definition, where belonging is measured less by blood and more by duty, less by past status and more by present service. And if that is true, then the most sensitive part of the story has not yet been reached. Because the real turning point may not be whether Meghan's title is debated in public. It may be the moment the palace begins treating William's future authority as the standard by which these decisions are judged. And if that is true, then the most sensitive part of the story has not yet been reached. Because the real turning point may not be whether Meghan's title is debated in public. It may be the moment the palace begins treating William's future authority as the standard by which these decisions are judged. That is where the pressure begins to rise. A monarchy can survive disagreement, and it can survive criticism, but it cannot easily survive uncertainty about who speaks from within and who speaks from outside. The crown depends on clear lines, even when those lines are emotionally painful. So when royal commentators began discussing whether Meghan's remaining royal associations should be tightened, restricted, or symbolically reduced, the conversation immediately became larger than one woman and one title. It became a question about whether the royal household is preparing for a stricter future under William. That possibility changes the entire mood of the story. Because if William's approach is now being quietly treated as the future standard, then the Sussex issue is no longer simply an inherited difficulty from the past. It becomes a rehearsal for the next reign. It becomes a test of how the monarchy may handle public conflict, private grievance, and royal status once the Prince of Wales eventually takes the throne. And for a family that has spent years trying to lower the temperature around Harry and Meghan, that is a very serious shift. The turning point, according to some royal watchers, is not that a dramatic palace order has been publicly confirmed. Buckingham Palace has not publicly announced the sweeping removal described by the strongest online claims. The turning point is more subtle. It is the way the conversation has moved from sympathy and reconciliation toward definition and control. In earlier years, the question often sounded emotional: could Harry and Meghan ever return to better terms with the family? Now the question sounds institutional. What remaining royal recognition is appropriate for people who no longer perform royal duty? That change matters because language shapes the monarchy. If the palace chooses to describe someone in a certain way, the world follows. If official pages, event programs, ceremonial references, or household language begin to shift, those changes may appear small at first, but they carry enormous symbolic weight. Royal power is often expressed through arrangement rather than argument. A seat moved slightly further away, a name omitted from a ceremonial list, a style no longer used in a formal context. These gestures may not create a headline immediately, but they tell insiders that the institution has made a judgment. And this is where Meghan's public position becomes especially difficult. Her title connects her to one of the most famous families in the world, but her public life has been built far away from palace control. That creates a contradiction the monarchy can never completely ignore. Every time her royal title appears beside an independent commercial project, media appearance, or public statement, critics argue that the crown's prestige is still being used outside the crown's discipline. Supporters may reject that framing as unfair, but the palace still has to consider how the wider public reads the association. Was this about personal loyalty or about protecting the future image of the crown? That is the question now sitting beneath every interpretation. If the palace acts too firmly, it risks turning Meghan into a symbol of rejection and making Harry's alienation feel even more permanent. If it does too little, it risks telling the public that royal titles can remain powerful even after royal duty has ended. Neither path is comfortable, but institutions rarely choose comfort when their long-term authority is at stake. For Charles, this creates a painful inheritance inside his own reign. He may be king, but the emotional cost of every Sussex decision still falls partly on him as a father. Any tightening of royal recognition can be read as a rejection of Harry's wife, and therefore as another break in the relationship with his younger son. Yet every delay can also be read as hesitation. That is why Charles's position is so difficult. He is not simply choosing between family and institution. He is being judged on whether he can protect both without losing control of either. William's burden is different, and in some ways colder. The future king must think beyond the immediate wound. He must imagine the monarchy 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when his own children are older and the rules of royal life must be clear enough to survive another generation. From that perspective, the Sussex question cannot remain permanently open. A future monarchy, led by William and Catherine, cannot keep returning to the same argument about who is inside the official royal story and who is not. That is why Catherine's steadiness matters in this section of the story. She is not a loud actor in the title debate, and no credible public evidence suggests she is directing any such process. But symbolically, she represents the version of royal life William is expected to build around. Controlled, service-focused, family-centered, and careful with public words. Her image strengthens the argument that the future of the monarchy must be disciplined if it is to be trusted. In that sense, the Wales household becomes the quiet contrast against which every Sussex controversy is measured. The public reaction also adds pressure. Older royal viewers, especially those who value duty and continuity, may see any firm boundary as overdue. They may believe the monarchy cannot keep allowing its name to be used in ways that create confusion about service and loyalty. But a different audience may see the same boundary as needlessly harsh, another example of an institution protecting itself before protecting people. That division matters because the monarchy survives not only through law and tradition, but through public consent. If the public meaning of a decision splits too sharply, even a practical step can become emotionally dangerous. The media understands this tension perfectly. That is why headlines about Meghan's titles travel so quickly. They are not merely reporting a procedural question. They are tapping into years of unresolved emotion: the wedding, the departure, the interviews, the accusations, the family distance, the silence, the brief moments of hope, and the repeated collapse of that hope. A title story becomes a family story. A family story becomes a national argument. And a national argument becomes a test of whether the monarchy still knows how to control its own narrative. This is where the strongest implication begins to emerge. The palace may not need to stage a dramatic public confrontation to change the reality. It may only need to shift the way royal recognition is handled going forward. A title can remain in one sense while becoming less useful in another. A connection can exist historically while being narrowed institutionally. The public may focus on the word stripped, but the monarchy may be more concerned with a quieter question: what should royal association be allowed to mean in practice? That distinction could become the real turning point. Because if future palace language begins to reflect a stricter separation between working royals and non-working royals, then Meghan's situation may be remembered less as an isolated controversy, and more as the case that forced the crown to define the rules more clearly. It would affect not only her public identity, but also Harry's standing, Charles's emotional legacy, and William's image as a future monarch prepared to choose order over sentiment. Yet this also carries a risk for William. Strength can reassure supporters, but it can also harden perceptions. If he is seen as the figure behind a tougher royal boundary, admirers may call him decisive, but critics may call him unforgiving. That is the burden of future kingship. The very quality that protects the institution can make the man appear distant. And once that image takes hold, every decision is read through it. So the story has now reached its most serious stage. It is no longer about whether one headline sounds dramatic, or whether one title remains debated. It is about whether the monarchy is quietly entering a new era where belonging must be earned through service, not preserved through memory. And that leaves one final question at the center of everything. If Windsor is preparing to draw a harder line around its future, what does that line truly mean for Meghan, for Harry, and for the monarchy William is one day expected to inherit? That is the question now sitting at the center of the entire story, because if Windsor is preparing to draw a harder line around its future, then the meaning of this moment reaches far beyond Meghan's name, Harry's anger, or William's reputation for firmness. It becomes a signal about what the monarchy believes it must become in order to survive the next generation. And that is why the story carries such weight, even while the most dramatic claims remain unconfirmed by Buckingham Palace. The issue is not only whether one title is formally removed, restricted, avoided, or debated. The issue is what the argument itself reveals. It reveals a royal household no longer able to depend on old assumptions. It reveals a family whose private fractures have become part of the public architecture of the crown. And it reveals a future king being judged not by what he says in a statement, but by what people believe he is prepared to protect. For William, The heart of the matter is no longer emotion alone. It is order. A future reign cannot be built on endless exceptions, uncertain boundaries, or a permanent question mark around who belongs to the active life of the monarchy. If the Sussex story has taught the palace anything, it is that ambiguity may feel compassionate in the moment, but over time it can become corrosive. It allows every appearance, every title, every public reference, and every commercial association to become another argument about loyalty, status, and royal meaning. That may be the quiet lesson behind the entire title debate. The monarchy does not only survive through popularity, it survives through clarity. People may disagree with the rules, but they must still understand that rules exist. They must know who represents the crown, who has stepped away from service, and who remains connected through family history but not through institutional duty. Once those lines blur, the monarchy begins to lose one of its greatest strengths, the ability to speak through symbols that people instantly recognize. For Meghan, that reality is deeply complicated. To those who support her, any effort to reduce or restrict royal association may feel like a final act of exclusion. It may seem like the institution closing ranks around itself and refusing to leave space for a woman who became one of the most scrutinized figures in modern royal history. That emotional reading cannot be dismissed lightly because the Sussex story has always carried personal pain alongside public controversy. Whatever one believes about the choices made by Harry and Meghan, the human cost of the rupture has been visible for years. But the monarchy does not make decisions only through the lens of personal hurt. It must also consider what a title communicates to the nation and to the world. A royal title carries authority even when it is not being used for royal duty. It attracts attention. It gives weight to projects, interviews, appearances, and public identity. And for critics of the Sussexes, that is precisely the problem. They argue that the crown cannot allow its prestige to remain available while its discipline is rejected. To them, the question is not cruelty. It is consistency. Harry stands in the most painful place of all. He is close enough to the crown to feel every decision as personal, but distant enough from its working structure to have limited influence over its direction. That is the tragedy of his position. He can defend Meghan, challenge the palace, explain his pain, and continue building a life outside royal duty. But he cannot force the monarchy to define belonging on his terms. The more the institution moves toward William's future, the more Harry may find that emotional history does not carry the same power it once did. And for Charles, this moment may prove one of the saddest patterns of his reign. He became king at a time when the family was already divided, when public patience was thinner, and when every silence could be interpreted as weakness or wisdom depending on who was listening. If he is too soft, he is accused of hesitation. If he is too firm, he is accused of abandoning reconciliation. The Sussex issue has placed the king in a position where every option carries regret. That is why William's emergence matters so much. Whether or not the most dramatic claims about Meghan's titles are accurate, the perception of William as the figure of discipline is becoming harder to ignore. He is increasingly seen as the royal who will not allow the future monarchy to be held hostage by unresolved conflict. That image may strengthen him among traditional supporters, but it also gives him a sharper public edge. He may become admired for clarity, but also criticized for coldness. And that is the difficult bargain of leadership inside a monarchy. The person who draws the boundary is rarely remembered as the person who suffered while drawing it. Catherine's importance sits quietly beside that reality. She is part of the future William is expected to protect. Her public role, shaped by restraint and continuity, helps define the contrast between the working center of the monarchy and the branches that now stand outside it. If the royal household is moving toward a clearer distinction between service and association, then the Wales family becomes more than a household. It becomes the model for the next era. That does not mean the Sussex chapter disappears. It means it may be placed differently in royal history. Meghan and Harry will always remain part of the family story, part of the modern monarchy's most painful public rupture. But the institution may now be asking whether memory should be allowed to function as authority. A wedding, a title, and a royal past may explain why the connection exists. They do not necessarily answer how that connection should be used in the future. And perhaps that is the final meaning of this individual story. The debate over Meghan's titles is not only about loss. It is about definition. It asks whether royal identity is something one keeps because it was once granted, or something that must continue to be supported by duty, trust, and public service. It asks whether the monarchy can remain human without becoming unclear, and whether it can remain disciplined without appearing heartless. So while this moment may seem to close one emotional chapter, it also opens a wider question about where the House of Windsor is heading next. Is this simply another wave of speculation around the Sussexes, or is it part of a slower movement toward a stricter, more William-shaped monarchy? Because as the debate around Meghan's place begins to settle into something deeper, another royal development is already drawing attention, and it may reveal even more about the pressure now building around duty, loyalty, and the future of the crown.